This is Visions Under Construction, a chance for our guests to share their visions and tell us what they're working on. For their continued support, we'd like to thank Simwood.com, who can turn you as a developer into a telco. Why not make CloudOnyx your communication partner? Go to cloudonyx.io. You can find everything about the VUC at vuc.me, thanks to Bluehost, and thanks also to zipdx.com, the conference bridge, and to voxphone.com for local rate dial-ins. Let's also thank everybody who's participated over these 11 plus years. We've got new and old, and 2019 in March, we will be starting on our 13th year, if I live that long, knock on wood. Anyway, we actually have audio. Why don't I say hello to Corrado, who's on the phone? That's okay. Hello, Corrado. Hey, Hank is with us. Hi, Hank.
Hi, how are you?
Great to see you. We'll be talking about Federation very soon. I have a hunch that we're going to be always talking about that, but it fits into life in a good way. Jay Carpenter out in Arizona, I think, right? Phoenix, is that right? No, you're muted. Now you there. Hello, you're still muted.
Hello, sorry.
Hey, Phoenix, is that right?
Phoenix, Arizona, that's right.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And of course, our old standby, Michael Graves, who's in the heart of Texas.
I'm not old.
No, but you're our old friend, our longtime friend. Should learn to use that one. You know what's really good about as you get older is that you can walk around the street and you can smile at young women and they will smile back at you. Unfortunately, it's not for the reasons that you would like. It's because they see their grandfather when they're looking at me, okay?
Yeah, it's the gray hair, is it?
It's not just the gray hair, I think. Well, it wouldn't be the demeanor. Anyway, we have a bunch of different disparate topics. There is one thing I wanted to mention because it came up in, let me find the window. It came up in another channel, and that's this. The Google Cemetery. That's Android Police, androidpolice.com. Pretty good list of the products that Google has sabered in the last couple of years. Their link shortener was pretty useful. That's gone. Google Spaces. No one understood what that was for. Google Talk was chat. It's been replaced. It's been used. Hangouts, which also is on the chopping block pretty soon. Google Now, Picnic, Picasa, Songs, Project Era, Project Tango, Allo. Now they've got Allo here. There was some discussion about whether Allo was actually gone or not. Google Reply, I don't even know what that is. We know Inbox and so on. Anyway, enough of that. That was just one thing. We were considering beginning. I want to talk about control, actually, because we had no subject an hour ago. So I came up with that. What can we control in life? What can't we control? Michael would suggest that it's a question of your own response, what you can control. And I think that was probably one of the better answers.
I think control is an illusion.
Yeah, we're in the Matrix, right? So the control is...
Well, the only thing we can control is ourselves and our reaction to things. So, but I tell you, I don't know what I saw. I didn't see it, maybe because it was some time ago, but Google Reader, I don't know if I saw that on the graveyard, but I missed that. I used Reader immensely, except that in the wake of Google Reader, other things came along, right? And so...
A lot of people complained when they killed Reader. That was probably the most successful thing, the most popular thing that they killed.
Yeah, that was my favorite RSS aggregator as well. Now I'm over on feedwrangler.com or .net, which isn't as nice, but it definitely gets the job done.
Yeah, I've been using Feedly, but I find that it's also true that I'm using RSS less these days.
That's a good point in and of itself. RSS, the thing about RSS is the average person doesn't know what it is or care. And yet it's very important, and I just trying to think of how to evoke the subject of podcasts, because there's so much rich stuff out there that the average person doesn't know about. And Google and everybody else, no one has been able to really communicate how to subscribe to a podcast, except maybe Apple on iTunes. But I don't think.
I got to tell you, Google launched with some fanfare not long ago their own podcast app. And I figured, okay, I'll try it because it's Google and it's native to my, Android phone. It's lame, and it's beyond lame. It's not good at all. And so I am doing Pocket Casts now.
The only hope I can think of is that once everybody's got SIM cards in their cars and connected all the time, because that's the best time to listen is when you're traveling. So if you're in your car, maybe somehow it'll become native, just like a radio tuner in a car. And then at that point, people will understand it. Anyway, we're going to start today with a topic that at one time you could not control at all. This is for Jay. You couldn't do anything with phone numbers. Everybody's got a phone number. It's like Social Security. In fact, it's better. You can have 20 phone numbers if you want, 50. If James was here, he probably has 100. But back in the day, in most countries, you got a phone and they gave you a number and that was the end of it. You had no control over anything. If you zoom forward to today, the folks on this call mostly would know that there are many sites you can go to and get all kinds of vanity phone numbers. And I'm not saying they're expensive either. It's cheap, dirt cheap. And they've also been all these toll-free numbers. Jay, you mentioned, I think it's 833, but back up a little bit and start a little bit at the beginning of the 800, which in the United States is toll-free. Then it went to 8. What was the next one? 808, then 8 something, then 8.
It was 888.
Yeah,
so
855. I have an 855.
888, 877, and now go ahead.
Let's get into that and get to where you want to go with the 833, because I know nothing about that.
Well, let me start it off by saying that the Federal Communications Commission of the United States is planning to launch an auction for a basket of yet to be issued 833 toll-free telephone numbers. And it's uncertain as to exactly when that will happen, but they are in the process of going through all the iterations of filings and public processes to do that. But this is what I consider to be an innovation in multiple dimensions. And let's kind of back up as you requested, Randy. 800 was a construct, I think, from the early 80s, maybe, that was basically controlled by AT&T, I believe. And they saw it as an innovation, a way to create this method for consumers to reach out and connect with businesses without having to worry about toll charges, which, back then toll charges could be substantial. You could be talking 10, 15, maybe 25 cents a minute. So in order to create something akin to, what we enjoy with internet domains, where we don't worry about how long we connect using a, google.com or whatever, the AT&T came up with these toll-free telephone numbers that basically shift the burden of the per minute charges to the company that you were calling. And that was a big deal. It was immensely successful. There were a number of incredibly successful business opportunities out of that. A couple being 1-800-Flowers. Prior to 1-800-Flowers, there was FTD. They had a majority of the telefloral market, and then a fellow named Jim McCann came along and set up 1-800-Flowers and basically almost, made FTD obsolete. Same thing happened with 1-800-Collect. Prior to 1-800-Collect being launched by what was then MCI, AT&T had about 95% of the collect call market, and then MCI launched 1-800-COLLECT and basically captured, I think, like 60%. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask our European friends the situation in France. So we're talking 800 toll free, blah blah blah. There was then an 8, well, numbers that start with 8 in France, but these are all a whole list of variable tolls. I don't know if this is the case in the States. So some numbers here, there are toll free toll free numbers, but a lot of these 8 numbers in France are some of them are very expensive. In Europe, did BT do that, you guys?
There's a difference between, the route is 800, but there were 0845 and 0870, 0871, 0844 that were very expensive, up to £1 or £2 a minute. So it was a bit confusing. The 0800, 0808 was and it still is the free toll, the free call, free phone and that thing. So because they needed to clarify the 8 route, they moved away the 0845, 0870 and that stuff on the 0345, 0370. And the 0845, 0870 are being dismissed progressively. There's one thing that probably caused a better take of the 800 numbers in the US is the fact that, for example, cell phone calls, the costs are spread between the caller and the callee. They both pay. Whereas all the European models is the caller always pays for everything.
Right.
So there are different models.
Looks like Corrado may have had a power cut, as happens occasionally. Just a quick thing that is annoying in this country is that for a long time, these numbers starting in 8, you'd look at it. So there would be like the new HP printer. There'd be a huge billboard with an 8-something number. These numbers looked like free numbers, but in fact, they were 50 cents for the connection and then 10 cents a minute. And I'll be damned ever if I'm going to make a call to get information about your printer and pay for it. And also, and this is in France, but I think it's probably the same in many European countries, perhaps not the UK. Also, a lot of support lines, like you are paying for a service and your ISP had a number. It was like, it's going to be such and such for connection and so many a minute. And it's only just recently, too bad Corrado's gone because he could answer this question. In this country, it's only recently, and I think this is a European rule, they could not charge you anymore for wait time, because otherwise you'd get on and be listening to their ad for 5 minutes and paying the minute charge. Anyway, Jay, I wanted to clear that up because the world copied the 8 thing, but they didn't completely. It hasn't been implemented in the same way. And as I mentioned, I have an 855 because when they came out and were available and they weren't expensive, I found a number that is a part of a nickname of mine. So each time one of these comes out, presumably same thing with the 833, same thing's going to happen, right? So back to you, Jay.
Well, you brought up a couple great points, Randy, and we can talk about those in more detail. But I would like to say that this does touch upon the control, which is the theme of this session. And I might butcher the name, but is it diaspora or
diaspora is good.
That's how I say it.
Diaspora,
okay.
In other languages.
Diaspora. I just got introduced to that basically today, and so I was looking over the website, and this opening up of a market for 833 toll-free telephone numbers, I think, is along the lines of Diaspora's vision of us controlling our own data and our own resources. So I won't go into that at this point, but to get back to the success of the toll-free telephone number market, basically up until about, well, the introduction of the internet, frankly, there were multiple instances of where industries were changed, captured, huge disruptions in the way goods and services were sold, and customer service and so forth. 1-800 contacts, another great example of a success story that was focused on a toll-free telephone number that spelled a particular phrase that was top of mind in the consumer's mind. And there are others that we could certainly talk about. But with the introduction of the internet, the toll-free telephone number, along with telephone numbers in general, and for that matter, telephone calls on the old copper network, kind of have been going the way of the fax machine and the pager. And it's this experience of picking up the phone and calling somebody is definitely out of favor. But with this auction that's going to be happening with 17,000 new issue 833 numbers that have been basically requested, there's a possibility that we'll see a rejuvenation of the attractiveness of not only toll-free telephone numbers, but possibly telephone numbers in general. So I'll just kind of leave it at that, and set the stage with that.
Okay.
I've never tracked an outlet of a new area code or anything before. How come it's only 17,000, not 1 million?
Well, because the 17,000 represents phrases that are associated with those 833 numbers. Like Randy was just saying, he picked up an 855 number that had a phrase associated with it that's his nickname. So what happened was, when the 833 new code was being issued, this particular Federal Communications Commission had the foresight to say, hey, look, we've been giving away these incredibly valuable resources for years. Why don't we see if we can experiment with an auction process? Because with these numbers, there are some very key phrases that are associated with the number. And
I don't know if you've ever seen.
How is this any different from domain name land grabs? It's all the same shit. It's all
there are yes, it's very similar to domain name land grabs, and there are some fundamental differences between internet domains and telephone numbers that make the telephone number realm and what's been referred to as vanity telephone numbers different, significantly different than internet domains. So go ahead, but I'll be quiet for a minute.
I was just going to say that there, and I put this in IRC. I was behind a truck that had a bumper sticker on it. And it says, "How's my?" You've seen those things. "How's my driving?" Call 800 something. And so somebody distributed these stickers. "How's my driving?" Call 800. Fuck you. I thought was it is a non. What's the word for it? Podcast. We'll see if they find and put us offline.
Well, you could also. Here's an interesting point. The number or the phrase you just uttered also spells "duck you."
It could, yeah, right, because of the
numbers. Yeah, the letters are mapped to the numbers.
That's the 17,000, right? Because there are 7 digits, but the digits have to correspond.
And spell multiple phrases.
Yeah, otherwise it's not useful.
Yeah. So the answer is, instead of 1 million numbers being auctioned, which actually is what they're setting the foundation to do, in my opinion, The 17,000 represents key phrases that you know, the remaining marketplace could identify and say, hey, these numbers spell at least 17,000 phrases that still have some sort of value in the marketplace.
But you'd have to count 833 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 0 1 2 3 4 5 6.
People might want those. That'll be interesting because I have a feeling like 1-800-Flowers is going to want to pick up 1-833 Flowers, so they're going to get into a nice bidding war with somebody, or someone's just going to troll them and see what happens. I don't know how that's going to work.
Well, Windows.com, some kid.
So it's not, and you know, the other parallel is Spectrum auctions, right? This is a public resource that's being sold, and what are we going to do with the money? Well, who knows?
Well, there are some interesting dimensions because they do cite that, hey, this is a public resource. You know, telephone numbers are a public resource. But the fact is that there's a lot of entrepreneurial and initiative, endeavor, creativity that can go into these addresses, let's call them. So, for instance, let me give you another for instance. The numeric set that spells 1-800 Napster also spells 1-800 MapQuest.
Right.
So you know, that's a key distinction between internet domains where you can map any IP address to a given phrase versus telephone numbers. It's just the opposite. One string of numbers can spell multiple, and in my opinion, infinite numbers of phrases. So that's a key distinction to keep in mind. And there are other, like 1-800 baskets also spells 1-800 caskets.
Right.
Is this like traditional phone numbers or domain names, where as long as you have to renew it periodically, or is it like more like the Spectrum licenses where those go up? Those can go up for auction again later if it's versus like someone can resell their number later because they're done using it or something like that.
So one of the interesting dimensions of this 17,000 number 833 auction is, in addition to what's called a primary auction, where you're basically opening up and allowing usage on 17,000, let's call them virgin 833 telephone numbers, they're also going to open a secondary market immediately. So if somebody, you know, initially bids and they get, let's say 1-833 California, they can immediately turn around, to my knowledge, and put that on the secondary market and see if they can, you know, maybe add some enhancements to it and then sell it. So, or just sell it to the next person that comes along. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's a lot more like the domain name registration concept.
Exactly. Yeah, and that the fluid nature or liquid nature of that secondary market is a key piece to enhancing the value of these 17,000 telephone numbers, because if you purchased one in the auction and then you couldn't turn around and sell it, that would be a problem. And you know, the other piece is that you need that secondary market in order to, you know, fully market the numbers. There might be potential users that weren't aware of the auction, so it's going to be more like selling a piece of real estate that initially is like vacant land, and there's a certain amount of marketing that goes into a piece of vacant land where you go out and you canvass prospective users, additional users, and you put together certain, you know, ideas for, are we going to use it for retail? Are we going to use it for industrial? Are we going to put office buildings on there? So all of that applies in this particular instance. And adding the secondary market, I think, is a key feature to this upcoming initial test auction.
But
is it substantially different than how REST-borgs already work?
And isn't 833 a little like .biz and .info, by the way?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's a significant amount of misdials that will go to the 800 version of these 833 numbers. And I'm sorry, what was the other question? I think, Michael, you had a question.
Is this substantially different than how REST-borgs have traditionally handled these numbers?
It's substantially different because toll-free telephone numbers have been allocated on a first-come, first-served basis, which created multiple distortions as well as problems, at least in my view. And, you know, just to give you a little background, I worked for a lot of years in the Future Numbering Working Group, which is an advisory committee through the North American Numbering Council to advise the Federal Communications Commission. And back as early as 2002 or 2003, the Federal Communication Commission was considering auctioning or using auctions as a method of allocation for toll-free telephone numbers. And it met with significant resistance, let's say. But this is a huge change in the way REST-borgs have allocated numbers on a first-come, first-served basis. So, yes.
Are they having anything with like domain squatting is a big problem? So, or like someone who doesn't like Beyonce, let's say, opens up a Beyonce site that using Beyonce.com or something like that. Is there a mechanism for like appeal or something in that process that's being considered?
And that's 7 letters. So perfect.
Well, the mechanism for appeal or dispute resolution is go in and buy it out.
Yeah, I don't think there would be. Because of the ambiguity. It's an interesting difference, by the way. Because of the ambiguity of it being a sequence of numbers, you can't go to court and say, well, they took Beyonce, because it's not Beyonce, it's CF, whatever, you know, something else. So that's interesting. That's
well, and you know, if you allowed that, let's say 1-800-Beyonce belonged, you know, Beyonce could claim some sort of trademark on it, then where do you stop? Does she get 1-888 Beyonce, 1-877 Beyonce? Does she get 602 Beyonce? You know, there's no end to it. And because of the multiple spellings of each and every telephone number sequence, you could have a situation where, does Napster get it? Does MapQuest get it? Does whoever has baskets of flowers get it? Get 1-800-Baskets, or does a mortuary service get 1-800 caskets?
Well, the other thing is Beyonce wouldn't be bothered by any of this, because if I had a number 833 Beyonce, obviously I'd be infringing on the trademark. So that's actually never going to happen, right?
Right. Well, you can't take whatever that numeric sequence is and then advertise it as 1-800 Beyonce.
Exactly. So that immediately obviates, if I can use a sophisticated word. In other words, that eliminates that problem. So that's kind of interesting. I never really thought about much about it.
Yeah,
I just grabbed.
There have actually been Supreme Court cases that have addressed this, because somebody got 1-800 holiday, only they had a 0 for the O in holiday, and they were taking travel reservations. And that actually went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that they had the right to go ahead and use it for travel reservations. The same happened with 1-800 Mercedes. That didn't make it to the Supreme Court, but it made it to the appellate courts, and Mercedes was not able to get 1-800 Mercedes, and actually people are making money off of 1-800-Mercedes by doing something called shared use to Mercedes dealerships.
That's
So
interesting. Now that surprises me. Anyway, speaking of control, so bottom line on this is that if you're interested in these things, you actually could go to our friends at SignalWire, for example, or any number of other, let's see, Call-Centric. A lot of people are in charge of reselling phone numbers, and you could go and try to get, even Google Voice, in fact, will let you do this. They will let you try to get a sequence you want. You have to do the conversion yourself, pretty much, I think, in most cases.
Well, let me make a point of clarification, Randy. It is still against federal communications regulations to buy a telephone number, be it toll free or a local dial number. Yes, it's done. It's done on the black market, but it is against today. It is against the regulations. So you have to be careful. And just to kind of transition a little bit into control, this is a big deal because just like our data with Google, with Facebook, whatever, if we build up a certain brand or a certain period of usage for a telephone number, if it's a business or whatever, or even our own personal use, we are building up certain value in that number, even a number that doesn't spell something, because you don't want to lose that telephone number and then have people try to call you a year or 2 years from now. That can be really disruptive. So this market mechanism, which pushes the control of the telephone numbers that we use closer to us as people, more like a social security number, as you were mentioning at the outset. This is a big deal, and it's right in line with the theme of this session, which is out of control and dysphoria. All of this is a movement to shift the control to us as individuals.
Well, recently, meaning in the last at least 5 years, maybe longer, you're able to port your numbers in most countries now. So I can only speak from my own experience here in Europe, where I've changed carriers on my mobile several times, and it's just a totally transparent, very easy process. Google will also, if you want to use Google Voice, they will also port your number in. I mean, what they call porting is where you have a phone number. So you don't own that phone number, and yet you can kind of pass it around, keep it for yourself, and tell your prospective company, carrier, I want this phone number, bring it to me. And then there's an authentication process. The only other thing I want to say, I want to stop talking because I want everybody else to talk. But the only other thing I wanted to say was that I recently heard a podcast, and it brought home a thing that I hadn't thought much about, which is that if someone wants your phone number badly enough, there's a hacking human social engineering prospect of it, which is, this has happened many times. They will call T-Mobile or whoever your carrier is and get into a discussion with them and say, I lost my phone, blah, blah, blah. And once they have your phone number, they've got your email, and so talk about losing control. Leave your mobile phone somewhere and let somebody else pick it up who has a little evil in them, and you'll see what losing control is about, because they've got your email. They may have your bank account. I resisted that for a long time. I think I even have now an app for banking, but I don't know. It's not a good idea to have everything on your phone.
AT&T is currently in a lawsuit with a cryptocurrency holder who had his number ported away from him, and with like two-factor authentication, if you can get control of somebody's telephone number, then all of a sudden you can look like the you can pass the two-factor authentication test if a text message is sent. Anyway, I believe AT&T is being sued for something like $200 million because a large cryptocurrency holder lost, I believe it was 20 million, and don't quote me on those numbers, but something in that magnitude. And you know, people have lost significant amounts of cryptocurrency because they had their mobile number or whatever ported away from them without their knowledge and certainly without their you know, authority. So
yeah. Well, I think the biggest losses in cryptocurrency have been people who forgot how to get into their wallet, and that includes me, James Bodie, and probably a lot of people who who had $10 worth, and then it became 1,000, and then we couldn't get it, and then it went back to 10. So
well, now it's for $10 again.
Yeah, so it's back to 10. Anyway,
yeah, maybe it's worth $2 at this point.
I haven't looked. I have not looked. I'm afraid to look. It's like not wanting to get on the scale in the morning. You know what I mean? Don't look at that. Don't look at what Bitcoin's worth. Anyway, we spent a little longer than I expected, but it's an interesting topic. 37 minutes. We have a few minutes left, more than a few. Let's get into a little bit this control idea of not using Facebook because they're in total control. Just to remind you that there's been 3 really pretty major horrible things Facebook's been involved in the last few days or last few weeks. You know, forget the elections and the Russian, you know, all of that's neither here nor there. What they did with your data, on the other hand, is a different story. And yeah, everybody is offering now ways for you to fill out a form and get all your data or quit the site or do this or do that. But apparently, in my discussion with Facebook in 2007, they said they couldn't delete anything, and they never deleted anything. They deactivated your account. If you leave, they're not getting any more of you, so that's probably okay. Google Plus is closing down, but Google is an advertising company. You have no control over that. You have an impression of control with GDPR, whatever it is.
Yeah, correct, GDPR.
Well, I'm glad that popped in my head because I couldn't remember it. Because now every site will tell you, hey, we're using cookies. You mind? Yes? No? Forget it? Some of them send you away if you say no, and others just let you read the stuff anyway. And still others show you a text page only, which is good. Anyway, one of the ways to move away from this problem, and Tumblr has decided they don't want porn sites anymore. So what are we going to do? You know, where are we going to go? Anyway, Hank's with us, and we talked a little bit about diaspora recently. It's an interesting thing, and yet it's the most interesting social concept that you know nothing about, basically. We're trying to get a little bit more information out there. Let's talk federation and see what that changes. Federation, if I get a really silly, my definition, federation means that the man isn't controlling what you're doing, that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't decide one day that this is the way it's going to be, and so on. Now, on the other hand, people are running instances or pods in this network, federated networks. So someone controls something. So this is hard for the average person to understand. Let's get Hank in here and talk about this. What do you see? Give us a big, oops, I just hit my microphone. Sorry about that. How do you feel this, Hank? Because you're developing and you're a user, and we've discussed endlessly all these possibilities. How are we going to bring more people in, and why should they be interested in something like Diaspora or Hubzilla or anything else that's federated? And there are many more names.
Yeah, the how is a very interesting question, which I'm trying to kind of grok. I actually, over the weekend, I had 3 unsolicited conversations with people that were concerned about their data. And it stemmed from a person in the group wasn't on Facebook. They're not keeping up with things. And then they came point blank, says, like, I can't believe that you, Hank, would actually put your data in Facebook, knowing about all that it is. And then I was like, well, what's the alternative? It's like, there's this whole Fediverse thing. Like, I've never heard of the Fediverse. I've heard that express I've never heard the Fediverse response like 5 times this week. And getting above the noise floor, as it were, it's difficult, but it comes with persistence, I think, and it comes with repeating the same vocabulary. One of the reasons why I'm starting to ask these questions about what is the Fediverse is because I use the term very broadly. That it includes Mastodon, anything that's an activity pub, anything that's federated, as a catch-all, because it's a nice word. It's not going to get caught up in a confusion. If I type the Federation, which is another thing that people use as a determination, I'm probably going to get a bunch of Star Trek sites. I'm going to get a bunch of other federated technologies. Fediverse is in and of itself, but some people have chosen to name that for more of a subset that only does activity pub, for instance. So getting on the same page on the marketing, I think, is very important. And also, I think we have to have a little bit more collaboration from the different projects and the people that are using them and developing them. So if Mastodon's increasing the profile of the Fediverse and Diaspora is, and PixelFed, all of us are, because no one's heard the term. The more it's repeated, the more people are searching on it. It just kind of builds up a nice snowball effect. But right now we're very much in the no one's heard of it, and we have to do a lot of yeoman's duty to improve that situation.
Hank, how familiar are you with Mastodon at all?
I use Mastodon every day as well. I basically my social media posting has gotten dramatically increased in the last few months, ironically, as I became a Diaspora developer. Because as I'm posting to Diaspora, I'm sending the same links into Twitter, into Mastodon, into LinkedIn, actually, as a matter of fact, as well, and Facebook. I have looked at their code base, but I haven't programmed in it. So I would say as a user, I'm extremely familiar with it. And I've actually found it to be a lot better than Twitter. I was never a big Twitter user or follower. I'm a much bigger Mastodon person. Whereas I was a huge Facebook user, and Diaspora is something that I use all the time. But I still haven't been able to break away from Facebook because that's still where all of my or most of my in real life friends are still. So I'm working on that.
Okay, well, one point I probably made last time is that VUC629, Mastodon creator Eugene Rochko, and also the fellow who hosts our Mastodon, which, by the way, is masto.vuc.me, Hugo Gamero, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Very interesting. And Hank, I know you've been following. I hope you've been following, because otherwise you're not my friend. The discussions about how it would be great if somebody could come up with a way to do one-click hosting for Diaspora, because this guy, Hugo, who we had on VUC 661, actually offers a service. It's not a click. You contract to him. You say, okay, I'm going to give you $5 a month through PayPal or whatever it is. And he runs it. He keeps it up to date. He has, it's a system that people do. This is what these people do. He has another job anyway, but I mean, his intellectual investment in this kind of technology allows him to just have some humongous virtual server, some collection of some kind of computing power, and that everything is just, I'm sure he doesn't spend any time on this, but when there's an update to Mastodon, it just is propagated through all of the instances that he's running. And I don't want anything to do with running. We're already running a WordPress is enough of a pain. Nothing against WordPress or, PHP or anything, but it's just, you still have to do work. So my point in my post that you saw, Hank, is that be great if somebody offered for a very small amount of money a way to just start. For example, Jay would be perfect to get going on his various interests, one of which is blockchain, another is these different numbering systems, and just assemble a small group of people. By the way, you could do this Mastodon too. You assemble a small group of core people who are interested in this topic, and they would bring in other people, and then this instance, in the case of Mastodon, or the pod, in the case of Diaspora, would become a little bit of a hub for this kind of knowledge. The counter argument that a few people have said is, well, that's kind of against the federation idea, because then it concentrates things. but all it does, you're still connected to the Fediverse, right? So what's your reaction to that, by the way, Hank? I don't think you were one of the people arguing against it, but it was
I wasn't arguing against it. I was, so it actually, I'm not sure why everyone think, I know that people are upset about, upset's the wrong word. People are concerned about like a Pluspora type thing because what they don't want is an instance with 10 million users, which is against federation. They want to have it broken up into a lot of small pieces and all that sort of thing. I don't think that's a practical problem. I just the community sizes are just they're gonna self limit to a certain point. To say nothing for the scalability of the hosting. When you get to 10 million users, no one's proven that these things can scale to that many daily users. Even Mastodon's the same thing. Mastodon.social was taken off the list of it. You can still become a member, but when you go to the Mastodon page that used to be the top site that you would show up in your list, that's not there anymore. They intentionally took it down because it's concentrating a lot of users unnecessarily. So I love the idea of making the hosting easier. I also again, I'm new to the community, but one of the things I want to do is like invigorating the development community means we have to invigorate the funding sources. And no, you do not have the option, thank God, of someone coming along and saying, I'm going to turn this into the next closed walled garden based on the same technology. The nature of the federation and those sorts of things make it so that's not really going to be a practical model. So one of the questions is a platform as a service type of model something that would work well? So like imagine DigitalOcean. I don't know if people are familiar with DigitalOcean hosting, but if it's literally like a one-click droplet, all of a sudden there's a diaspora, someone's getting paid to maintain it for people. Would that build up enough of a funding source to be able to give the development team resources to hire a few developers and that sort of thing? That could be interesting. It is certainly something which there is a huge maintenance tail that has to come along with it. And so that has to be done in an automated way. The technology stacks between Diaspora and Mastodon are very similar. So if they've done that, if someone's done that with Mastodon, they could do that with Diaspora as well. But someone would actually have to go ahead and do that. And then everyone could have their family pod or their little company's pod, and they all talk together and everything works the way you expect it to.
By the way, did you know that you probably do, someone is working on a plugin that will bring WordPress feed into Mastodon. So you could follow a WordPress blog in your Mastodon instance. I'm trying to figure out if you could even think of that in Diaspora. Diaspora is a little different. Mastodon, people compare it to Twitter. It's only comparable to Twitter in the way it looks. It looks like TweetDeck, which, by the way, I don't care for TweetDeck for some reason. When I have to use Twitter, I just go to the web because I don't like any client I've ever seen for it, at least on the desktop. But anyway, Mastodon really isn't like Twitter to me, except physically, because it has this concept where, for example, our Mastodon is not very active, but if everybody was doing something on it, they would have followed people that they're interested in. And if they follow the convention that you don't follow, rugby teams and stuff, you're following our common interest, suddenly it becomes this huge library of things built around a topic. And it's a similar thing that I see for a Diaspora in a pod, is that you would have this concentration. And I expressed this in posts, but since nobody listening to this has heard about it, what I was saying is that if you were, say, interested in science fiction, you could have stories posted, or at least links to them with a little bit of rich text around it. And that doesn't mean that you're limited in this little group. It just means that people could subscribe and find out about it and subscribe to the various people on it. But there would be no limit, because the people inside it would subscribe to other pods. And there could be, this is for some reason the way I see it, but it seems to go against most people's vision, but that's not the first time in my life that's happened.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. So these Tumblr refugees, I have seen several posts from people who are like, well, they've specifically mentioned Mastodon, not diaspora, but both would have the same problem, not problem, have the potential same issue. There has never been, as far as I know, a adult content pod or Mastodon community. What will that look like?
Hank, I think there is a sex worker community on Mastodon. I'm pretty sure I saw one go.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I think so.
So it'll be interesting. Number one, the hosting fees associated with that would get these are very content rich. So you're talking many terabytes to petabytes of information. So Tumblr was free, or still is, but for that sort of thing, which this would not be. I can't imagine that model would scale well unless it was covered in ads all over the place. But it will have the artifact of there will be, for lack of a better expression, seepage of that information into other parts of the place where there are some people who don't want to have a not safe for work experience. And how will the software have to adapt to help people filter those things out that don't want to see it? And how will it adapt to a tremendous increase in volume of posts, which Tumblr and these other places, they do that by doing AI, and these systems don't do AI. They just show you everything that is relevant to you in chronological fashion.
Now, you know about diaspora. The thing I know about Mastodon is that you can invalidate, you can stop or block any particular instance of Mastodon, because there's been a lot of weird stuff on Mastodon. It got successful in in the very niche markets. For example, I think anime. There's a huge number of Chinese and Japanese people on it who have, in fact, Mastodon.cloud has been bought by somebody in Japan. I can't remember who, some big company, I think. The point being that a lot of people, there was just tons and tons of Japanese language stuff on there. But if you run, I'm pretty sure that when you're running a Mastodon instance, you can say, I don't want this thing connected in the Federation. You can do that in diaspora too, can you not?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. They by default, I believe both models are the same, which is by default it federates with everybody, and then you blacklist sites you don't want to, versus the inverse of that, which would be I only federate with specific machines or specific servers that I'm interested in.
And that would be contrary to the desires of most people who are into the Federation, right? That to just have a list that's only, I just want, baseball, girls softball, rugby. I don't know.
Yes,
that would be contrary to the.
When I first found diaspora in the spring, one of the things I thought about was I know that corporate blogs, like corporate social networks, private corporate social networks, but that are connected to the internet. It's like, oh, what about a whitelist idea? And then it becomes somewhat of a thing. And they're like, no, that's literally the response I always, that is the antithesis of what the Federation is about. The Federation aspect of that is about. That doesn't mean that isn't something. Yeah.
Go ahead, Jay.
Question, Hank. Are you familiar with the Interplanetary File System, IPFS?
I am notionally. I've listened to several podcasts and read about it a little bit. It's a very fascinating piece of technology.
So as you were talking about the scaling issues with diaspora and Mastodon and so forth, I was wondering if you looked at the potential of IPFS as a solution to the scaling situation.
Well, yeah, I mean no, I have not looked at IPFS for that particular thing. I would say the first thing I would probably go to is doing some kind of a content delivery network for like just pure gigabytes or terabytes of storage. But I was thinking about that. My comment was more about the scaling of like from the user's perspective. So if I'm following 100 people, let's say, and I have a person that posts once a week and I have other people that are posting several times a day, under Tumblr and Twitter and Facebook, they actually are trying to figure out what would I want to see more. So for example, if a close friend of mine posts something very sporadically, they're going to elevate that and it'll show up in my news feed. These other Mastodon and diaspora, it'll show up where it's supposed to show up, but it's not going to be filtering out these other people, which I see all the time. So it elevates up in my profile. there's no means of tailoring that, and there's no plans to put in place any AI or anything like that as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that volume from the user's consumption perspective is going to get solved from a user experience perspective.
Yeah, that circles back to the control issue that is the theme of the session. Is, you know, that's kind of one of my frustrations with Facebook, and there's probably ways to do settings on, you know, prioritize different feeds from different people, but it just almost to me seems random in terms of what shows up on my timeline, and you know, and that's kind of frustrating.
It's not exactly random. It's practically decided by how many times you interact with the timeline or the posts from someone else, and of course there are paid posts that take priority, and that is that sort of dumb intelligence that is behind it, is what you do and how you interact with Facebook. The difference I see between Diaspora, Mastodon, and Twitter, for example, is that because Twitter is a huge universe, there is nobody in control of what goes into your feed. It's you choose what you see in your feed, following people, but also following hashtags. Hashtags are the keystone probably of what you really interact with, because you get involved in a discussion between people that are following that hashtag, and you know other people. So there's that fil rouge that is connecting people with others. Whereas in Diaspora, for example, the owner of the pod, the admin of the pod, is deciding or is trying to push a narrative and push an argument and push a subject. So there's a different level of control for the end users that might only see what is in that pod and can only access what is not, that is deemed okay, in that is stopping other pods from federating. The problem with the noisiness of Twitter is because there's nobody in control of that. And then filtering, pre-filtering.
You follow though.
Yeah, of course, but it's you following. Let's glance and then gloss over the fact that sometimes Twitter is unfollowing people that you're following at random, or is suggesting you to follow people that you really would never think in a million years to follow. So the AI behind it is really broken.
Well, there's another problem too, which is promoted tweets, and that is so obnoxious. I just can't look at.
Yeah.
Only go to Twitter when I have a reason. I can't. It is not a place I would go hang out. And you know what?
That's why, if I can interject just a second, I never use, and probably said that before, the default apps for the for any social media I'm using on my mobile phone. I'm using alternative applications that are using APIs to access the feed that I'm looking at, because it cuts off all the dross.
I never thought of
promoted posts, promoted tweets, and everything else, and tweets that you can stick as on the top of your timeline continually. They disappear because they are implemented in the web interface and on the client itself as protocols, but they're not accessible through the APIs.
Oh, that's brilliant. Why didn't you tell me this 10 years ago? Well, 10 years ago, Twitter was actually an habitable place, unfortunately. Yeah. Anymore.
Yeah.
Not with their Corrado. Dan Jenkins would like to know if you've had many Amazon deliveries. Is that some secret code?
Yes, I had a few.
Have you?
Yeah, I purchased a couple of things.
Okay.
I just had 2 packages today.
At the end of this, it's 1900 hours here in France. No show and tell, no dangerous demos.
No, I've just bought a few things for clients. When I don't need to buy in large volumes, and just I need 1 or 2 units, and I just buy from Amazon. I don't.
Is this end of your Christmas gifts that we used to give to?
Well, my children have an Amazon wish list,
Yeah.
all of them.
What about your clients, though?
No, well, okay. I'll probably have a round of Christmas cards for the clients and for the suppliers.
You don't send boxes of chocolates to the reception desks of various places to make sure your calls get through? You don't know that?
Okay. It's a bit of a gray area there, because sometimes it's taken the wrong way, like some kind of bribery. So
I actually have a specific question back for Hank before we close, and it's regarding diaspora, because I never noticed this before. So the big complaint, as we were just saying a second ago, and Corrado was talking about as well, and Jay, is this screwing around, these algorithms and what they're showing you and all that. But I made the statement, I think it was last week, whenever we were talking about diaspora, that it's chronological. But in fact, it's not chronological, in that apparently when there are comments on something, it comes back up. Is that right? How is that? What's the hierarchy of what you're seeing, Hank? Do you know?
It really depends. It really depends on the way that the back end sorting is, because there is a concept of an update time, which is driven by if comments are made or if someone's liked it and that sort of a thing. But it doesn't do any. Again, it has the filtering is done with the tags, which is a constant. One of the things we are literally just starting to look at, and it's been discussed many times, but a couple of the developers and I are talking about, is being able to have advanced search features, which could then be used to building in specific streams. So you could have your retro computing stream and your soccer stream, and then you can have multiples of those to further filter your content and tailor it. We are literally just in the what should the UI look like type of phase of that. But the backend should support that relatively easily. So it isn't like we need to have a complete re-architecture to do something like that. But we want to spend some time thinking about what the user experience is like before we get underway with trying to code something like that.
I just like to put out a call before we finish for people to look into diaspora. And diaspora became kind of a joke because it was it's at least 10 years old, about 10 years old now. And when I say joke, what I mean is that a lot of us, especially a lot of people who used to be involved in what we're doing right now, this VUC, people like Life and the Asterisk, the Digium people, a lot of the telephony people. So we all went over in mass when diaspora.org, Join Diaspora, was first instigated. And, you know, we all did the same thing. We visited once a year. We said, hello, what's happening? Hello, world, blah, blah, blah. And there was nobody. And then we left. And then we came back. I know for a fact that everybody did exactly what I did. Was it, oh, diaspora, I'm still on. Let's see. Does my browser remember the password? Because I don't. Yes. Okay. So I got in and there's nobody. The fact is that today there actually is compelling reason to start looking into Mastodon, diaspora. Don't listen to what people say about, you know, Mastodon just looks like Twitter or diaspora, blah, blah, blah. Go look at these things, because there are, I think for the investment of time that you would make in putting a username and password, your email and password into something like diaspora and taking a look at it and trying to find maybe people who you know. Give you an example. Dan York is on every one of these platforms. And those of us who follow the VUC know Dan York. He's a really interesting guy. And so follow people like that. Follow, I don't know if you're into Mike Elgin, you can look for him. He hasn't posted in a couple of months on diaspora, but you know, whoever floats your boat, go look for those people and then find new friends, but experience these platforms. I have high hopes. If it isn't diaspora, it'll be something else. It'll be something else that's open source, that's federated, that is not tied to a small group of people who eventually admit that they screwed around with an election, or that they sold names, or that they used a pre-PR firm that did some really nasty stuff. I can't even, the list is so long, and we sold your, oh, and by the way, we had a data breach, blah, blah, blah. It's just, the list is endless. You want to get on something that's organic, that's natural, that actually human beings like Hank, who I met on Diaspora, people like that. Hank, I'm going to mention Pluspora, which was for people who came from Google Plus, PLUSPORI.com. But Hank, you're on Diaspora, which I'm also on, DIASP.org. What's your main Diaspora pod?
Diasp.org, DIASP.org.
Diasp, which is actually the sort of the original, because Join Diaspora is has either closed for new regs or at any rate got so big and then it's kind of in a stasis. So that became, if I'm not mistaken, diasp.org. But you could look for a list. Gosh, we published a list last week, I think. There's a list. Just Google. Hey, Google's your friend, right? Google for...
Or DuckDuckGo.
Or DuckDuckGo. Find it. I really highly recommend you check it out and just see what's going on. I have made lifelong friends on every one of these platforms, starting with CompuServe, which was a silo, right? But we got to keep this going. This is too good. So check it out. As far as the VUC goes, we're September 7th, December 7th, 14th will be on next week, 21st. Who knows what's going to happen for the holidays? But we'll be around starting our 12th year next year. So stay tuned, stay with us. Anybody else have any final comments, New Year's resolutions, best wishes before we go?
If I can quickly, the argument that Mastodon and Diaspora look like Twitter is like saying that two women are the same because they wear the same dress. They probably don't. It's the content. What's underneath that is important, and the people that are inside that. So
good point. Or as Charlton Heston said, Soylent Green is people, and so is Diaspora, so is Mastodon, so is Twitter, really. If you follow the right people on Twitter, it's fine. Just don't use the API, as Corrado said. All right, that's it for this week. We'll check you out real soon now.